He slapped a 7-year-old black boy mid-flight and sat back like nothing happened. The mother screamed, passengers froze, and the flight attendant sided with the man. But then a silent veteran stood up. What happened next shocked the entire plane. But let's start from the beginning. The flight from Miami to Chicago was uneventful, at least until it wasn't. At 36,000 feet, while most passengers were dozing off or flipping through in-flight magazines, a loud smack echoed through the first-class cabin, followed by a sharp, confused cry. Heads turned. The source of the sound was unmistakable. A 7-year-old black boy named Jamal, seated by the window next to his mother, had just been slapped across the face. The man responsible, white, balding, maybe mid-60s, sat upright in his seat, face red, chest heaving slightly with rage. "Teach your damn kid to behave," he snapped, as if what he had done was somehow justified. The stench of whiskey mixed with the sterile scent of cabin air. His name, as it would later be known, was Ronald Green. A stunned silence fell over the cabin. For several seconds, no one moved. Not the boy, not his mother, not the passengers, not even the flight crew, just the sound of the engines humming beneath the floor. Jamal looked frozen, his bottom lip trembling, his big brown eyes pooling with tears he didn't yet understand. His small fingers gripped the armrest, his whole body rigid. His mother, Simone Carter, mid-30s, composed, confident, snapped out of her shock, throwing off her seatbelt and leaning over to shield her son with her arms. "You touched my child?" she asked, voice tight with disbelief, her entire body shaking with adrenaline. Ronald sneered, waving a hand dismissively. "He's been kicking my seat for 30 minutes. I paid for peace and quiet, not to babysit some animal." That word. Animal. Simone's face blanched. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a dam about to burst. But before she could respond, 2 flight attendants rushed over, alerted by the noise. A tall woman with a brittle smile and a young man who looked barely out of college stood between the rows, eyes darting between Ronald and Simone. "Sir, please calm down," the woman said, lowering her voice as if to soothe a tantrum-prone VIP. "Ma'am," she turned to Simone, "perhaps you and your son can move to the back, just until things cool down?" "What?" Simone's voice cracked, rising. "He hit my son, in the face, and you want us to move?" The young male attendant looked lost. Ronald remained seated, clearly enjoying the absurdity of the moment. "I warned you," he muttered under his breath. "You people never learn boundaries." "You people." Another dagger. The tension was now suffocating. Simone stood straight, towering over Ronald, though he pretended not to notice. "Get the captain, now," she said firmly, voice trembling but commanding. "This man assaulted my child." Passengers nearby had started recording. Phones were out, held discreetly or boldly, depending on the level of outrage. A woman across the aisle, perhaps in her 50s, whispered, "This is disgusting," as she filmed. A man in the row behind Ronald muttered, "Unreal. I saw it. He hit that kid. No question." Still, the flight attendants hesitated. They weren't trained for this. Not really. They were trained to smile, to manage turbulence, to hand out pretzels, not to confront entitled men with privilege and tempers. But someone else did. From several rows back, a man stood up slowly and began walking forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, late 40s maybe, with sharp eyes and quiet authority. Passengers instinctively parted for him like the sea. A tattoo of an Army Ranger emblem peeked from under his rolled-up sleeve. No one knew his name yet. Not Simone, not Ronald, not the crew. But that was about to change. He stopped at the edge of the row and looked directly at Ronald. "I saw everything," he said. His voice was steady, controlled, but there was steel beneath it. "You assaulted that boy." Ronald snorted, annoyed now. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't flinch. "The guy who's not going to let this slide." The female flight attendant held up her hands nervously. "Sir, please return to your seat." "No," the man replied. "Not until you do your job, or until law enforcement is waiting for this man when we land." The energy in the cabin had changed. It was no longer confusion or awkward avoidance. It was rage, simmering, sharp, and focused entirely on Ronald Green. Simone, still holding her son, looked at the man who had just stood up. Her eyes flickered with gratitude and something else, resolve. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, dialing. "I need legal on standby," she said calmly into the receiver. "Yes, he struck Jamal. We're still in the air." Ronald looked back and forth now, less confident. "You can't be serious. This is ridiculous. He was annoying, I told him." The man stepped closer. "The only thing ridiculous here is that you thought you'd get away with hitting a child. You're not going to walk away from this." And Ronald finally paused. Something shifted in his eyes. Fear? No, not yet. But unease, certainly. The captain was notified. The crew's tone changed as the situation escalated beyond corporate protocol and into liability territory. Ronald was moved away from Simone and Jamal. A formal incident report began. Witness names were taken. The man, the veteran, returned to his seat quietly, but his presence lingered like a warning. For the rest of the flight, the air felt electric. No one slept. No one relaxed. Jamal leaned into his mother's shoulder, eyes closed, face still red from the slap. But he was safe now. Watched over. Protected. And Ronald? He sat alone, silent, while the eyes of an entire plane burned into the back of his skull. But what happened after the landing? That's what turned this story into something no one could have predicted, and it's only just beginning. The cabin remained tense. Though the slap had been dealt nearly 15 minutes ago, the echo of it hadn't left the air. It lingered like smoke after a fire, visible in the stiff postures, in the quick glances, in the way no one dared speak above a whisper. Simone sat straight, arms wrapped tightly around Jamal. The boy leaned into her, cheeks still damp with tears. His little body trembled occasionally, more from confusion than fear. Simone gently brushed a curl from his forehead, whispering soothing words, even though her own throat felt scorched from holding back rage. Across the aisle, Ronald Green shifted in his seat, his entitled confidence beginning to chip. The smugness was still there, but it flickered, just enough for those watching to notice. He tapped irritably at the touchscreen in front of him, ignoring the phones that had started capturing his every move. The two flight attendants had retreated. They hovered near the galley, whispering to each other, casting occasional glances toward Simone's row. They looked nervous. One of them, Sarah, according to her name tag, seemed to be checking the company manual on her tablet. That's when a voice sliced through the silence again. "I saw what happened." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was clear, solid, like a gavel dropping onto a courtroom bench. The man who spoke was Marcus Lane, the Army veteran who had stepped in earlier. He was still standing in the aisle, arms crossed, eyes focused directly on the flight attendants. "And I'm not the only one. Half the front section did. That man," he pointed calmly at Ronald, "struck a child. You don't need corporate policy to know that's assault." Sarah tried to speak, but Marcus raised a hand. "I don't want excuses. I want to know one thing. Is this flight crew going to report what happened to the captain? Or are we pretending this never occurred?" A murmur of agreement passed through nearby passengers. Some nodded. One man lifted his phone. "I have it on video, clear as day." Another passenger, a woman in business attire, probably a lawyer by the look of her, stood up as well. "I'm an attorney. If this doesn't get reported to the authorities upon landing, there will be legal action, and not just against him," she added, pointing to Ronald, "but against the airline." Simone looked up, meeting Marcus's gaze for the first time. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say thank you, but something heavier was behind her eyes. Something tired. Something like, "Why do we always have to fight this hard to be believed?" Marcus didn't need her to speak. He understood. Ronald scoffed, arms folded across his chest. "You people are so dramatic. All I did was stop that little brat from kicking my seat. You hit a child." Marcus cut him off, his voice now like cold steel. "No one cares about your excuses." The tension was about to snap. Suddenly, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Chicago O'Hare. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." A beat passed, then another, and then, for the first time since the slap, Simone stood up. "I'm not sitting until someone acknowledges what just happened to my son," she said firmly. "That man attacked a child and no one here, not the crew, not this airline, has taken it seriously." Her voice didn't shake this time. Another woman stood up behind her. "I was sitting 2 rows behind. I saw everything too. He didn't just hit him, he did it like he thought he had the right to do it." And one by one, more passengers began to speak. "I heard him say, 'You people.' He was drinking heavily before takeoff. He mocked the mother when she cried. He told the crew to move them, not him." It became a chorus. Not loud, not aggressive, but undeniable. The tide had turned, and Ronald Green, for the first time, looked small in his seat. The younger flight attendant, Josh, took a deep breath and finally walked toward Marcus. "We've notified the captain," he said quietly. "Security will meet the plane when we land. Statements will be taken. I'm sorry we didn't respond sooner." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded and returned to his seat. But the cabin watched him like he'd just done something sacred, something rare, something everyone wished they'd done first. Simone sat as well, pulling Jamal closer. His breathing had slowed. His small hand reached up and touched her cheek. "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" he whispered. Simone choked back tears. "No, baby, you did nothing wrong." He nodded slowly, still confused but comforted by her certainty. A few rows back, the woman in business attire tapped on her phone, sending the video to multiple outlets. It had already been shared hundreds of times. #justice. For Jamal was gaining traction. Comments were flooding in. Marcus stared out the window as the plane descended through clouds, Chicago's skyline beginning to peek through. He hadn't planned on getting involved. He never did. But some things, you just can't let slide. He had seen too much in war, too much cowardice, too many people turning away. And now, in a country that claimed to be post-racial, post-hate, he had just watched a grown white man strike a black child and nearly walk away unchallenged. Not today. The wheels hit the tarmac. A jolt. The beginning of the end. Simone looked at Marcus. This time she did speak. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I did." The seatbelt signs dinged, but no one stood. They were waiting, watching, holding their breath for what would happen next, because the flight might have landed, but the reckoning had just begun. The moment the plane rolled to a halt at Gate 17C, the energy inside the cabin shifted yet again. But this time, it wasn't tension, it was anticipation. The passengers, still seated by order of the captain, exchanged looks. Phones were gripped tightly, still recording. Simone straightened Jamal's jacket, brushing invisible dust from his shoulders. Her eyes were glassy but clear. She had passed the emotional shock. Now came the storm. Ronald Green hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. He sat motionless, face pale, lips pressed into a flat line. The bravado that had carried him through the slap, the insults, and the smug silence had dissolved the moment he saw the younger flight attendant whisper something to the pilot. When the captain nodded grimly and made a call to the ground, Ronald knew he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "I didn't mean to," he muttered quietly, almost to himself, staring at the seat in front of him. Marcus Lane heard him. He leaned slightly forward. "But you did." The aircraft door opened with a pneumatic hiss, and cold terminal air spilled into the cabin. Standing just outside, 3 uniformed officers, one in plain clothes, and next to them, a short black woman in a gray pantsuit holding a leather briefcase and a laminated badge that read Civil Rights Legal Defense Initiative. Her name was LaToya Reynolds, and she wasn't here by coincidence. She stepped in first, calm, controlled, eyes scanning the cabin like a battlefield. "Simone Carter?" she asked. Simone stood. "That's me." LaToya offered a gentle smile. "I'm your lawyer. I represent the firm you called during descent. We've already received the footage and statements from 3 passengers. Don't worry, he's not walking away." Gasps rippled through the front rows. Behind LaToya, 2 airport officers stepped inside. One of them addressed Ronald directly. "Sir, you've been accused of assaulting a minor mid-flight. Please stand." Ronald began, his voice cracking. "This is a mistake. I'm a Platinum member. You don't know who I—" "We do, Mr. Green," said the officer, pulling a set of cuffs from his belt. "And now the internet does too." The clinking sound of metal echoed like thunder. Jamal flinched and buried his face in his mother's coat as Ronald, now truly panicked, was lifted from his seat. "This is insane! He was bothering me!" Ronald shouted, struggling. A man from row 6 leaned out into the aisle. "You slapped a child and called him an animal. Enjoy explaining that to a judge." The cameras didn't miss a second of it. Ronald's face, twisted with desperation, red and shiny with sweat. The cuffs. The walk of shame down the aisle of first class, where just an hour ago he sat like a king. As the officers escorted him off the plane, Simone exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Marcus stood beside her, silent but solid. A few passengers clapped, not in joy, but in agreement, in solidarity. The media was already waiting in the terminal. By the time Simone and Jamal stepped into the concourse, LaToya walking beside them, a small crowd had gathered. Reporters raised microphones. Phones streamed live to thousands. And yet, Simone didn't flinch. She stood tall, her son's hand in hers. A journalist stepped forward. "Miss Carter, do you have a statement?" She paused, then spoke, not loudly but clearly. "My son was attacked today. Not because he did anything wrong, but because some people still believe they have power over others based on skin color. I'm not just speaking as a mother. I'm speaking as a woman who's tired. We are not staying quiet anymore." The cameras clicked. Marcus exited a few steps behind, holding nothing but his coat. Someone tried to approach him. "Sir, are you the man who intervened?" He shook his head gently. "I'm not the story. That boy is." Back inside the terminal, Ronald was led to a side room in handcuffs. He still protested, voice hoarse, but the officers ignored him. He was no longer a client, no longer a first-class passenger, just a suspect. Simone and Jamal were offered water, a private room, and a ride home. LaToya sat with them as paperwork was started. She explained the next steps: pressing charges, media protection, a potential civil suit against the airline for the crew's inaction. But Simone had one question. Will he be held accountable? Really held? LaToya nodded slowly. This time, yes. It's not just you. The world is watching. Later that evening, the story was everywhere. Local news anchors opened with, "Child assaulted mid-flight. Retired executive detained at O'Hare." The video had over 4 million views by midnight. Hashtags like #Justice for Jamal, #Protect Black Children, and #He hit a child trended on Twitter and TikTok. The airline released a cold, PR-crafted statement. "We are aware of an incident on Flight 732 and are cooperating with authorities. We do not condone any form of violence." But it wasn't enough. Social media erupted. Boycotts were called. Commentators demanded accountability not just for Ronald, but for the crew who tried to silence Simone instead of protecting her son. Simone sat in her living room that night, holding Jamal close as he finally drifted into a peaceful sleep. Marcus had checked in via text, just one message. "He's a brave kid. Don't let anyone dim that light." She stared at the screen for a long time, then replied, "Thanks for standing when others didn't." And far across the city, in a quiet apartment, Marcus sat by the window, watching the night skyline. He didn't need applause. He didn't want fame. But for once in a long time, he felt something settle in his chest. Something like peace. Because that flight hadn't just landed in Chicago. It had landed right in the heart of a country that still didn't want to admit how far it had to go. And someone had finally stood up before it was too late. The world didn't wait long to react. By the time Simone put Jamal to bed that night, the video had gone viral. Not just local viral, but global. Millions had watched that slap. Millions had seen the child flinch, the mother cry out, the man stand up, and justice begin its slow but steady crawl through a narrow aisle of first class. News networks across the country ran the story in prime time. Businessman assaults black child on plane. Passenger intervenes. Silent hero shuts down airborne racist in real time. Mother demands answers after son attacked mid-flight. But it wasn't just headlines. It was conversations in living rooms, classrooms, courtrooms. It was the tears of mothers who saw their own sons in Jamal. It was the rage of fathers who'd been told to stay calm in the face of injustice. It was children asking, "Why did he hit that boy, Mom?" And parents struggling for words. And in the middle of it all, Simone, who hadn't asked for any of this, found herself at the heart of a movement. 3 days later, she stood before a sea of microphones in front of the Cook County Courthouse. Her lawyer, LaToya, stood beside her. Jamal was home with his grandmother. The charges had been filed. Assault of a minor, hate crime enhancement, public endangerment. Ronald Green was out on bail, but the damage to his life had already taken hold. He had lost 3 corporate board positions in 48 hours. His firm had scrubbed his biography from their site. Donations he had once proudly made to public foundations were now being quietly returned. Still, Simone wasn't smiling. She didn't feel triumphant, just tired. "I'm here today," she said into the row of flashing cameras. "Not because I wanted this spotlight, but because we've been silent too long. My son deserves to grow up in a country where people like Ronald Green are the exception, not the system." She paused, let it sink in. "My son is not loud. He is not disruptive. He is not a threat. He is 7 years old, and he was attacked by a grown man, in public, and no one, not a single crew member, stepped up. Except one." There was a stir in the crowd as she looked to the side. Marcus Lane stood under the shade of a tree just outside the press perimeter. No cameras on him, no fanfare, just watching. She nodded toward him. "You want to talk about heroism?" she said, voice lifting. "You want to talk about strength? It's not in how loud you shout or how rich you are. It's in standing when everyone else sits down." That moment made headlines, too. Back at his modest apartment in the South Side, Marcus sat watching the coverage. He had declined every interview, every podcast invite, every book agent's call. He wasn't interested in the spotlight. He'd seen what the world did with stories like this, twisted them, commercialized them. He didn't want that. He had done what was right. That was enough. But something in Simone's words lingered. Strength is standing when others sit down. He'd been sitting for years. Since leaving the military, he'd kept his head down, pushed his pain deep, told himself his job was done, that standing up was someone else's job now. But maybe it wasn't. That night, he sat down and began writing. Not a speech, not a post, a letter to Jamal. You're stronger than you know, little man. Not because you cried, but because you kept going after you cried. Not because you were brave, but because you were real. Don't let the world turn you hard. Be loud. Be kind. Be unstoppable. He folded it carefully and dropped it in Simone's mailbox the next morning without a name. The airline issued a second, more serious statement under mounting public pressure. We deeply regret the failure of our crew to take appropriate action. We are conducting a full review, have placed 2 employees on leave, and are reevaluating our staff training on bias, safety, and passenger protection. But apologies weren't enough. The Carter family filed a civil suit, not just against Ronald Green, but against the airline. They didn't want money. They wanted reform, required bias training, clear policy changes, accountability. And the airline, after days of bad press and falling stock, agreed to begin negotiations. LaToya called it a small step in a long war. Simone called it necessary. The public called it justice. As weeks passed, the buzz began to fade. The hashtags cooled. The media moved on. But something had shifted. A video began circulating in schools, teachers using the footage to discuss racism, responsibility, and courage. Parent groups used it in workshops on allyship and child protection. Airlines across the country revised their in-flight incident response training, quietly, without press releases. And in one classroom, Jamal stood in front of his second-grade class during show and tell. He held a drawing in his small hands, a plane, a mom, a man in a green jacket standing tall. "This is the man who made the bad guy stop," he told his classmates. "What's his name?" one girl asked. Jamal smiled. "He didn't say, but my mom says his name doesn't matter. What he did does." A month later, Marcus finally visited the Carter home. He didn't knock, just stood on the sidewalk, unsure if he should be there. But Simone saw him from the window. She opened the door slowly and stepped onto the porch. Neither said anything at first. Then Simone walked down the steps and hugged him, tight. No words, no cameras, just gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered again. "You already did," he replied. And Jamal, from the doorway, waved with a big grin. "Hi, mister." Marcus waved back, and for the first time in years, he smiled like he meant it. That flight had lasted just over 2 hours. But for everyone on board, it changed everything. It reminded a country that silence is a choice, that courage can be quiet, and that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is one person refusing to look away.